tremendous devastation caused by Hurricane Melissa.
Terrifying, the worst day of my entire life.
Once a village, now an island.
There's no food.
The most destructive wildfires ever to hit Los Angeles.
This was a beautiful home. I had a lot of good times here.
These are just a few of the major extreme weather events that have hit the headlines in recent years. And the evidence is stronger than ever that many of these kinds of disasters were directly influenced by climate change. And that's thanks to a branch of climate science called attribution studies.
And then you can see that it was really hot here this year.
World Weather Attribution, or WWA, is a global organisation that studies individual extreme weather events.
What we are doing is basically answering the question whether and to what extent has human-induced climate change made an extreme event more likely or less likely, or more intense or less intense.
Extreme weather events are selected for study based on their impact. For example, a high death toll or significant damage to infrastructure. I wondered if you could walk me through the process of how do you do an attribution study?
The first step is to find out what has actually happened. And that sounds trivial, but is sometimes actually quite difficult. Ideally, we will look at weather station data. In many countries, there are only a few weather stations, and that is a big limitation.
Satellite data is also used to establish where the weather hit and how intense it was.
And then we would, in the next step, find out what kind of event is that in the world we live in today.
This is done using climate models, simulations run by huge supercomputers. They estimate how variables like temperature and rainfall behave in the world's climate system. Attribution studies use different climate models to compare how extreme weather events might turn out in different global warming scenarios.
Temperatures are now 1.3 degrees warmer than they were before we started burning fossil fuels. Is the event we have just observed in the warmer world, is it a 1 in 2 year event? Is it a 1 in 10 year event? We compare that with the same event if it had occurred in a world without climate change. Is it still a 1 in 10 year event, in which case climate change wouldn't have any influence, or would it have been a 1 in 100 year event, in which case then we could say, because of climate change, this event has been made 10 times more likely.
Hurricane Melissa was one of the most powerful storms in modern history. It caused at least 95 deaths across the Caribbean, making it a strong candidate for an attribution study.
Tropical cyclones in general are more complex types of extreme events to study. The climate ones, they are relatively good in simulating rainfall. They are very bad at simulating wind.
Tropical cyclones are also relatively rare, so there's not much data to use in studies. To overcome these problems, researchers at Imperial College London have created the IRIS model, a database of millions of synthetic tropical cyclone tracks. WWA's attribution study examining Hurricane Melissa found that climate change made a storm of this strength 5 times more likely and increased the intensity of its winds and rainfall.
Jamaica was bang in the middle of the path of this hurricane, and they had very good early warning system. They evacuated people as best as was possible. Still, people did die. The destruction of the houses and infrastructure is enormous. And that shows there is just a limit of what you can do. You can't just move the island out of potential pathways of ever increasingly intense hurricanes.
Attribution science has been evolving since the 1990s, and it's increasingly being used to strengthen climate lawsuits. This is Saul Luciano Yuya. He's a farmer who lives in the Peruvian Andes. and his home is under threat from melting glaciers. In 2015, he sued the German energy company RWE, arguing that its emissions contributed to melting the glaciers. And he wanted them to pay for flood defences. Attribution science was key in strengthening the case as it moved through the court system.
Las montañas, los glaciares están derritiéndose y eso ha provocado que haya riesgos a la vida y estoy aquí para pedir justicia climática.
Dr. Noah Walker Crawford helped bring the case to court.
We've had a growing wave of climate litigation over the past 2 decades. Attribution science has advanced so much that that's providing the kind of evidence for cases that wouldn't have been possible 10 or 20 years ago.
Saul's case was ultimately dismissed in 2025. The court ruled that the specific risk of flooding to his home was not high enough to investigate whether RWE should pay out.
However, the court found that in principle, these major fossil fuel companies can be held liable for their contribution to climate change. That means, in principle, major polluters can be made to pay for climate change impacts. So it may only be a matter of time until one of these cases is successful, until we have a precedent, and that could really open the door to a large number of future cases. Once fossil fuel companies have to pay out for climate damages, that raises serious questions about their business model, because it means that greenhouse gas emissions equate to a financial liability. And that will put significant pressure on investors to move their money away from fossil fuels and toward renewable forms of energy production. And it'll also put a lot of pressure on politics to find more sustainable long-term solutions to address climate change.